The ambulance sirens wailed at the ER entrance as two gurneys burst in. I took the charts, glanced at the names, and my heart stopped. Richard Holloway, severe trauma. Jenna Holloway, multiple abdominal injuries. My husband and my daughter-in-law. 5 minutes ago. I thought my months of silent revenge were finally ending. I never expected fate to drag both traitors back to my strongest territory, the emergency room, where I would be the one deciding if they lived. My name is Margaret Holloway, but everyone in this chaos calls me Maggie. I am 57 years old, and I am the charge nurse of the emergency department at St. Gabriel Medical Center in Clearwater Springs, Colorado. This place is my kingdom, built on controlled panic and the smell of antiseptic, and I rule it with a cold efficiency that my staff respects and my residents fear. This Saturday night was no different. The waiting room was a sea of misery. The monitors beeped an anxious chorus, and we had just cleared a code blue in Trauma 2. I was grilling a new resident about his sloppy suture technique on a facial laceration when the radios crackled to life. St. Gabe's, this is Medic 1, ETA 2 minutes with a high mechanism MVC, and the paramedic's voice was tight. Medic 3 is right behind us with the second patient from the same scene. Severe trauma. The automatic doors hissed open, unleashing the metallic clang of gurneys hitting the floor. Dr. Reyes, our triage doc, grabbed the first chart. Patient 1, Richard Holloway, unresponsive, probable thoracic trauma. He grabbed the second. Patient 2, Jenna Holloway, multi-system trauma, rigid abdomen. I was holding my clipboard, ready to assign the rooms. I looked down at the names he'd just shouted. Richard. Jenna. My husband. My daughter-in-law. I froze. The world tilted. The sharp, coppery smell of blood hit me, overwhelming the bleach. The squeal of the gurney wheels seemed impossibly loud, but in my head, there was only silence, quickly filled by the echo of their voices, the whispers, the lies about late-night meetings, the dense legal jargon on the contracts they'd slid across the kitchen table, and the image, sharp and clear, of the small white pills I had been secretly crushing and flushing down the toilet for the past 3 weeks. For a fraction of a second, 2 versions of me went to war. The nurse, whose oath demanded I run to that gurney and start an IV, and the widow, the grieving mother, whose entire being screamed with a hatred so cold it burned. The memory of my son, Luke, flashed before me, his car, mangled on a dark road 2 years ago, an accident that I no longer believed was an accident at all. The nurse won, but only barely, and on her own terms. I made the decision in a nanosecond. Davis. I snapped at the charge nurse meant to relieve me in an hour. You take trauma 1 and 2. I'm running the board. She nodded, confused by the sudden switch, but too busy to argue. I stepped back to the coordinator's desk. It was the perfect position. I was violating no ethics by treating family, but I controlled every resource, every test, and every person who walked into those rooms. A state trooper, rain dripping from his hat, followed the gurneys in. He pulled Dr. Reyes aside. I only caught fragments, my hearing tuned sharp. Irregularities at the scene, the trooper muttered. Skid marks don't match the impact. Looks staged. A cold shock ran down my spine. The dominoes I had so carefully set up were falling, just much faster and harder than I ever anticipated. The team rushed Richard toward the trauma bay, his chest already tubed. They wheeled Jenna past me next. Her eyes were closed, her face pale, and dangling from her wrist, covered in dark, sticky blood, was the silver bracelet, the one I had placed on her wrist myself, the day she married Luke. A twisted, broken symbol of the family she and Richard had systematically destroyed. A young resident, seeing the look on my face, touched my arm gently. "Maggie, that's your family. Do you want to take a break? We can cover?" I turned to him, my voice flat, devoid of the woman he knew. "No, I need to be here." I paused, my gaze fixed on the red double doors of the trauma bay. I have to see this end with my own eyes. The present snapped tight. A wire pulled to its breaking point. The adrenaline of the ER bay faded, replaced by the weight of the last 2 years. I stared at the monitors tracking their vital signs, and I had to ask myself, where did this night truly begin? Was it the day Luke died, or was it the day I received that secret, whispered phone call from the hospital's legal department, asking about an insurance policy I never knew existed? It started, truly, 2 years ago, on a cold stretch of highway just outside Denver. My son, Luke, was dead. They called it an accident, a single-car crash late at night. I remember the funeral, the sharp smell of lilies and damp earth. I was numb, a hollow shell of a mother forced to bury her only child. But I remember Richard. He stood beside me, stone-faced, accepting condolences with a detached calm that chilled me more than the November air. He was composed. I was shattered. Jenna, Luke's wife and a widow now in her early 30s, was the opposite. She clung to me, her grief theatrical and wet against my shoulder. She called me Mom, constantly, her voice breaking. In those first dark months, I welcomed it. I let her move into the guest room, convincing myself that in losing a son, I had gained a daughter. I needed to believe I had not lost everything. My marriage to Richard had spanned over 30 years. He was the successful one, the president of finance at Northbridge Therapeutics, a pharmaceutical giant. We had been a team once, but Luke's death carved a canyon between us. Richard retreated into his work, taking more and more business trips, leaving me and Jenna alone in the large Clearwater Springs house. 2 women rattling around in shared grief, or so I thought. The first prickles of unease were small, a look between Richard and Jenna in the kitchen that lingered too long, his hand on her back, a gesture meant to be comforting, but felt proprietary. I'd see Richard delete a text message the moment I entered the room. Sometimes, when they thought I was napping on the sofa, I'd hear a low chuckle from the den, a shared intimacy that stopped abruptly when I stirred. Then my own body began to betray me. I started experiencing dizzy spells, a fog settling over my mind. I'd forget why I walked into a room. I was exhausted, an iron-heavy fatigue that felt wrong for a woman as active as I. Jenna became my devoted caretaker. "Mum, you forgot your vitamins," she'd say sweetly, handing me the small plastic organizer she'd started filling for me. Around the same time, Richard began his campaign. "Maggie, you should retire," he'd say gently. "Sell this big house. We found a wonderful high-end facility near the new Northbridge headquarters. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." One evening, over dinner, they cornered me. "Mom, with your memory lapses," Jenna began. "Richard and I were thinking, maybe you should sign a power of attorney, just to help with the bills and assets. It would take so much stress off you." I was tired. I was grieving. I still trusted them. Mostly. I reluctantly agreed to look at the paperwork. I went for my annual physical, convinced I had an underlying illness. My results came back perfectly normal. My doctor frowned at his chart. Maggie, about the sedative you're on. The dosage seems high if you're still working the ER. I stared at him. I'm not on any sedatives. That night, I waited until they were asleep. I crept into the kitchen and dumped the contents of my evening vitamins onto the counter. Beneath the fish oil and the calcium tablet, I found them two small, white, scored pills. I recognized them instantly from the ER. A heavy-duty hypnotic, the kind that causes confusion and memory loss with long-term use. The kind I had never been prescribed. I stopped taking them immediately. Within 3 days, the fog lifted. My mind felt sharp, clear, and cold with suspicion. A few nights later at the hospital, we received an elderly woman, dehydrated and confused. Her son had brought her in, claiming dementia, but her blood work told a different story. She was being systematically over-medicated. As I looked at her vacant eyes, a horrifying mirror of what I was becoming, I felt sick. But I pushed the thought away. Not Richard, not Jenna. The denial shattered one night last month. I came home late, and the garage door was open. I heard them arguing, their voices low and sharp. We just need her signature before the facility paperwork goes through. Richard hissed. She's starting to suspect something. Jenna's voice was sharp. Well, what if she fights it? We need that POA. Once she's declared incompetent, everything will be ours, just like we planned. I stood in the darkness, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would break through my ribs. They were right. I was suspecting, but I was no longer confused. I was awake. And that was when I knew I wasn't a patient. I was a victim. The conversation I had overheard in the garage was still a cold knot in my stomach when my desk phone rang at the nurse's station. It was not an internal line. Maggie Holloway speaking. Mrs. Holloway. A crisp, professional voice said, "This is Olivia Park from St. Gabriel's Internal Legal Counsel. I need to meet with you, preferably today. It is highly sensitive." I started to suggest my office. "No," she cut in. "My office. In the administration building, 10th floor. And please, do not mention this call to your husband or your daughter-in-law. It may concern them directly." An hour later, I was sitting in a room that smelled of carpet cleaner and old files. Olivia Park was a woman who looked like she consumed spreadsheets for breakfast. She did not bother with pleasantries, instead sliding a thick document across the polished table. "This is a life insurance policy taken out in your name 6 months ago. That was 2 months after your son died." I looked at the benefit amount. It was staggering. I looked at the beneficiaries Richard Holloway and Jenna Holloway. At the bottom was my signature, a flawless imitation of my own handwriting. "I never signed this," I whispered. "I'm aware," Olivia said, sliding a second paper over. "This is a cognitive assessment report from a private clinic, Silver Pine Neurology. It concludes you are suffering from mild cognitive decline, memory impairment, and are a prime candidate for financial guardianship." I had never heard of Silver Pine Neurology. I had never taken that test. "Why are you showing me this?" My hands were shaking. "Because the insurance company flagged the policy as unusual," Olivia explained, her eyes fixed on mine. "They contacted the hospital, as your employer, to verify a series of clinical incidents you have supposedly had in the ER. The blood drained from my face. Incidents serious ones. Medication errors, changing a dosage on a cardiac patient without authorization, charting procedures on shifts you weren't even scheduled for. All things that would support a claim of incompetence. "That is impossible," I said, the words catching in my throat. "I did not do those things." "We know." Olivia turned her computer monitor toward me. "Our IT department tracked the logins for those errors. They weren't made from an ER terminal." She clicked the mouse, and a grainy, time-stamped security video began to play. It showed an empty meeting room on the surgical floor. "The logins match the times Richard was logged in our visitor system," she said. "He often uses this room to wait for you at the end of your shifts." I stared at the screen. Richard, in the hospital, using my credentials, systematically building a case that I was losing my mind. Olivia did not look away. "It gets worse. We were subpoenaed in an unrelated matter regarding Northbridge Therapeutics. Your son's name came up." My head snapped up. Luke. Before he died, Luke had filed a whistleblower lawsuit against Northbridge. He claimed one of their new drugs was causing severe, undisclosed side effects in patients. I had known nothing about it. Luke had protected me from his own battles. After his death, Olivia continued, the suit was quietly settled. The settlement was paid out to the representative of his estate. That representative was your husband. She pushed a bank summary across the desk. I saw the deposit, a massive sum, and I saw the withdrawal, dated 1 day later, moving a large portion of that money into a new, high-yield savings account, a joint account, in the names of Richard Holloway and Jenna Holloway. The air left my lungs. The money from my son's death. They had taken it. "Maggie," Olivia said, her voice dropping. "If you are not genuinely ill, then someone with intimate access to your personal life and your professional credentials is trying very hard to build a legal case saying you are... They are trying to steal your assets, this fraudulent insurance policy, and the settlement money that was rightfully yours." I felt a violent wave of nausea. My marriage, Jenna's tears, the vitamins, the shared glances, it was not just infidelity. It was a cold, calculated, long-term conspiracy. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. I gripped the arms of the chair, the short, panicked breaths of a trauma victim rising in my throat. I was going to be sick. But then, just as quickly, the panic subsided. It was replaced by something else. The hard, icy calm of the charge nurse during a code blue. The part of me that assesses, analyzes, and acts. I was not just a grieving wife. I was an expert in systems. I understood procedure. And I knew, better than anyone, how to read a chart and find the evidence of a lie. I looked up at Olivia. My voice was no longer shaking. "What do you want me to do?" "We need more," Olivia said. "The bank statements and the video are circumstantial. We need to prove they are knowingly defrauding you, that they are the ones administering those pills. We need to involve the police, but we need an airtight case." She paused, her expression hardening. "To catch them, Maggie, you have to go back home. You have to continue being the confused, frail woman they think you are. You have to be the bait." I walked back into my house that evening, the exhaustion from Olivia's revelations clinging to me like a shroud. It was a genuine weariness, but underneath it, something new and hard had settled in my chest. I was not going to run. I would not pack a bag and flee, leaving them the spoils of their betrayal. I would stay. I would look both of them in the eye, every single day, and I would repay them with the very thing they were trying to inflict on me, the terrifying, creeping loss of control, followed by the complete destruction of their future. The performance began the next morning. I became the woman they wanted me to be. I misplaced my keys and found them, with Jenna's help, in the refrigerator. I asked Richard the same question about his work schedule twice in the span of 10 minutes. I saw the satisfied, almost pitying glance he exchanged with Jenna over my head. They believed the drugs were working beautifully, that my mind was unraveling just as they'd planned. They didn't know I had stopped swallowing. I palmed the pills Jenna handed me with my morning vitamins, only to flush them down the toilet when she wasn't looking. I replaced them with identical-looking sugar-free supplements I'd bought from a pharmacy across town. Physically, my body began to heal. The fog lifted. My mind felt like a steel trap, every detail locking into place. But to them, I slumped. I let my hand tremble when I reached for a glass of water. I would occasionally slur a word, blaming fatigue, and I made a habit of accidentally falling asleep on the sofa right after dinner. That night, Richard brought up the house again. "Maggie, honey," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "We really need to get the paperwork moving on selling this place, for your sake." I had my phone, already recording, tucked into the deep pocket of my cardigan. I looked up, blinking slowly, as if surfacing from a deep fog. "Oh," I murmured. "Yes, whatever you think is best, dear. You and Jenna you just take care of it all. I'm so tired of thinking." The look of unadulterated triumph that passed between them was so naked, it almost made me laugh. I met Olivia in a deserted hospital stairwell 2 days later. "I don't know how long I can do this," I whispered, the words tasting like acid. The way she smiles when she hands me those pills, the way he pats my hand and tells me I'm confused. They are feasting on my grief. Olivia. They might have let my son die, maybe even pushed him toward it for money, and I have to sit at their table and pretend to be senile. "Every recording is ammunition," Olivia said, her voice firm. "Every note you take. You are not just a victim anymore. Maggie, you are a witness." I needed more. That night, I waited until 2 in the morning, until the silence in the house was absolute. I crept to Richard's locked office. He thought I was a technological dinosaur, a nurse who only knew how to use medical charting software. He forgot who had raised a tech-savvy son. Luke had spent an entire summer teaching me about password recovery protocols and backdoors. I was inside Richard's email server in under 10 minutes. I found them. The chains of romantic emails between him and Jenna. They were sickening, full of cheap pet names and plans for the future. And they had started 3 months before Luke's accident. But that wasn't the worst of it. I dug deeper into his archived corporate mail, searching for Northbridge. I found the real twist. An email from Jenna, sent from her personal account to Richard's work address, dated only 1 week after Luke's funeral. She was the one who first contacted Northbridge Legal about resolving Luke's outstanding complaint quietly. The chain ended with a message from Richard to her, "It's handled. The settlement is ours. Once her cognitive decline is formalized, everything will be ours. The money, the house, the hospital will clear the way for her early retirement. We just have to be patient." I didn't cry. The pain of Luke's death, which had been a dull, heavy ache for 2 years, crystallized. It turned into something sharp, focused, and utterly cold. My grief transformed into a calculated, righteous rage. This was no longer self-defense. This was a surgical strike. I started a new notebook, hidden in my hospital locker. I documented every detail. The time Jenna tried to give me a booster dose, claiming I'd forgotten my morning pills. The date Richard was seen moving a box of old tax files from the garage into the trunk of his car. Every lie, every pill, every condescending smile became Exhibit A. That night, I stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection. I saw the 57-year-old woman, they saw the greying hair, the shadows under the eyes. But my eyes were not vacant. They were bright and steady. I leaned toward the mirror, my breath fogging the glass, and whispered to the empty room. You think you're managing a frail old woman. In reality, you're lying on my operating table, and I am deciding exactly where to make the first cut. Olivia didn't want to meet in the stairwell again. Our next meeting was in a parked car 3 blocks from the hospital, where she introduced me to Daniel Ruiz. He was a quiet man with watchful eyes, a former detective who now specialized in financial elder abuse. He's the best, Maggie, Olivia said, and he's ours. We became a secret unit of 3. Daniel handed me a small, heavy object, a burner phone. Only use this. Keep it at the hospital, he instructed. I buried it in my locker, hidden beneath a stack of spare scrubs. Daniel's first move was to follow the money, and what he found painted a picture far darker than simple greed. He called the burner phone 2 nights later. Your husband isn't just rich, Maggie. He's desperate. Daniel's voice was gravel. He had traced the settlement money from Luke's lawsuit. It wasn't just sitting in the joint account. Large portions had been wired to offshore accounts. And worse, he'd uncovered a string of massive payments to a high-interest loan shark operation based in Las Vegas. Richard wasn't just planning a retirement, he was frantically plugging a hole in a sinking ship. While Daniel tracked the money, I became a spy in my own home. I used my knowledge of medical tech suppliers to order 2 audiophile-grade micro-recorders. That night, while they watched television, I taped one securely under the heavy oak kitchen table. I planted the other deep inside the dashboard of Richard's car. The payoff was immediate. The next day, I retrieved the car's recorder and listened, my stomach clenching. I heard Jenna's sharp voice. We have to move her to the facility soon, and we need to up the dosage before that evaluation. We need Dr. Bryant to see her when she's at her worst. My isolation at St. Gabriel's also broke in an unexpected way. Dr. Lila Monroe, a young ER physician I had mentored, cornered me by the pharmacy. Maggie, she whispered, looking terrified. I have to tell you something. Your husband, Northbridge, they pressured me last year to alter a patient's test results for one of their clinical trials. I did it. I've regretted it every day. Olivia and I met with her, and I saw the relief in her eyes when we explained the full picture. We had a new ally, one from the inside. With Lila's help, we set a trap. I knew Jenna was scheduled to meet me in the cafeteria to discuss paperwork. I sat at a table directly under a known security camera, shuffling a stack of forms. Lila happened to be at the next table. As Jenna sat down, I pushed a document toward her, a document Olivia had drafted. I pretended to be confused, my hand trembling. Oh, I just don't understand this line. Jenna? Impatiently. Jenna grabbed the pen. Mom, it's fine. Just sign here, she said. physically guiding my hand to the signature line. What she didn't read was the microscopic print above it. I am signing this document under duress, believing my mental state is being impaired by medications provided by Jenna Holloway. Her fingerprints were all over my hand, all over the pen, all captured on camera. The biggest blow came from Daniel. He called the burner phone late one night while I was on shift. His voice was flat. "Maggie, I was digging into Luke's accident, just on a hunch. I pulled the traffic cam footage from the highway, 2 miles before the crash site, from 2 years ago." He paused. "It's grainy, but about 5 minutes before the crash, Luke's car goes by, and right behind it, tailgating, is a dark-coloured SUV. It matches the make, model, and year of Richard's vehicle, the time, the route. It matches." The phone felt like ice in my hand. It was no longer a question of if Richard knew. It was the horrifying, sickening possibility that he had been there, that he had followed my son, perhaps run him off that dark road himself, all to silence a lawsuit and collect a payday. The grief was a physical assault, threatening to buckle my knees in the middle of the ER, but the pain clarified my resolve. Proving murder after 2 years would be nearly impossible. I didn't need to. I could prove the fraud. I could prove the poisoning. I could prove the conspiracy. I would make certain he never, ever had the power to harm anyone again. The plan was no longer just about the police. It was about total annihilation. "Olivia," I said in our next meeting, "we are going federal. We will prove Richard used his executive position at Northbridge to conceal the settlement from me, the rightful beneficiary. This isn't just elder abuse. It's corporate fraud." We would bring the entire pharmaceutical company crashing down on his head. He would lose his job, his reputation, and his freedom. I finished my shift, sitting alone in the break room at 3 a.m, watching the automatic doors of the ER open and close. A car crash victim, a child with a fever, innocent lives. I wondered how many others were out there, being slowly destroyed by the people they went home to. I pulled the small burner phone from my locker. My fingers were steady. I sent a single text to Daniel and Olivia. "Ready for the next step?" Richard announced it at breakfast, his voice slick with false brightness. "Great news. Maggie, I managed to get you an appointment with the best neurologist in the state, a Dr. Bryant over at the Silver Pine Clinic. He's seeing you tomorrow." He smiled at Jenna, a tight, conspiratorial look. I knew the name. Silver Pine. This was the clinic that had produced the fraudulent report Olivia found. This wasn't an evaluation. It was the final, formal step to seize control, the last piece of evidence they needed for the guardianship hearing. I met Daniel in the hospital's underground garage during my lunch break. "This is it," he said, pressing a small silver pendant into my hand. It looked like a simple piece of jewelry. "It's a high-fidelity recorder. Do not let them touch it." Olivia had already confirmed the local police were coordinating. They had obtained a warrant to monitor Dr. Bryant, tying him to other fraud cases. This appointment was no longer just about me. It was about catching the entire ring. The next day, I walked into the Silver Pine Clinic, making sure to lean heavily on Jenna's arm. I kept my eyes unfocused, my expression placid and vaguely confused. Dr. Bryant was exactly as I'd pictured, smooth, impeccably dressed, with a voice like warm oil. "So, Mrs. Holloway, can you tell me what year it is?" he asked, smiling patronizingly. I looked at Richard, then back at the doctor. putting on my best performance of a mind struggling through fog. 1994. I ventured. And the president? Dear. Clinton, I whispered. Is it Mr. Clinton? I saw Dr. Bryant give Richard the most subtle, reassuring nod. Jenna squeezed my hand, a gesture of support that felt like a snake coiling around my wrist. He ran me through a few more simple tests, which I failed spectacularly. Finally, he sat back, tenting his fingers. Well, he said, addressing Richard and Jenna as if I weren't there. It's just as I noted in my previous report. I looked up, letting my eyes widen just a fraction. Previous report? I asked, my voice small and reedy. I've never been here before. What report, Dr. Bryant flushed, realizing his mistake. He'd just admitted to a document I was never supposed to know about. Richard shot him a look that was pure venom. Ah, just reviewing the files sent over. Of course. The doctor stammered, trying to recover. I merely adjusted some of the clinical wording to match what I'm seeing today, to suit the desired outcome, for the family's peace of mind. I felt the tiny pendant against my skin. Got him. As we walked out into the bright afternoon sunlight, Richard was almost giddy with relief. Wonderful, he said, clapping his hands together. Now we can move to the next step. My lawyers will file the guardianship petition immediately. This is the proof we needed. Jenna pulled me into a suffocating hug, her perfume filling my nostrils. See, Mum, she whispered into my hair. It's all being taken care of. You won't have to worry about a single thing anymore. The irony was so bitter I nearly choked. That night, Richard opened a bottle of expensive champagne. To the plan, he toasted, handing me a glass he knew I was too medicated to enjoy. To finally getting Maggie the help she needs. I let them fill my glass. I raised it, my hand shaking just enough to be convincing. I brought it to my lips, pretending to sip, my eyes intentionally hazy. They saw a defeated, drugged woman. I saw two criminals celebrating their own downfall. I was counting down, not to my commitment, but to their arrest, their victory. However, made them careless. A few nights later, I heard them arguing. Jenna's voice was strained, coming from the kitchen. We have to sell the house now. Richard, we can't wait for the court. We have to follow the procedure, he hissed back. Procedure won't pay Vinny. She snapped. Vinny? The name Daniel had mentioned? The loan shark from Vegas. I realized, with a sudden, cold jolt, that Jenna wasn't just greedy. She was terrified. Their desperation was escalating, and desperate people do not stick to legal plans. The final confirmation came via a text to my burner phone from Daniel. It was just one sentence. Richard took out a new accidental death policy on you. 1 month ago. Double indemnity clause. My blood turned to ice. They weren't just planning to put me in a home. That was Plan A. The loan sharks were forcing them to accelerate to Plan B. A tragic accident that would pay out twice as much. I sat in my dark bedroom, the weight of this new reality crushing me. I had a choice. I could follow Olivia's original plan, wait for them to move me to the nursing home, where the police would be waiting. That was the safe route. But the policy, the double indemnity, they weren't going to wait that long. They were planning something permanent. I couldn't just be the bait anymore. I had to force their hand, make a move that was faster and harder than theirs. I lay down in bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. I heard Richard's heavy footsteps in the hall, pausing outside my door to listen. I heard the faint clink of glasses from the kitchen, smelled the lingering odor of champagne and Jenna's flowery perfume from their earlier celebration. They thought I was asleep, a harmless obstacle soon to be removed. I lay perfectly still until the footsteps retreated. Then, in the absolute darkness, my eyes snapped open, clear and focused. "Tomorrow," I whispered to the empty room. "Tomorrow, it's my turn to pull the alarm." The accidental death policy changed everything. It moved the timeline from when to now. Olivia arranged the next meeting not in her office, but in a secure, windowless room in the downtown Federal Building. A man in a severe suit, an investigator from the Financial Crimes Division, listened without expression as I laid out my story. He was already investigating Northbridge for unrelated securities fraud. I was the key to their case against Richard personally. I slid the USB drive across the table, the emails, the audio from Dr. Bryant's office, the bank transfers from Luke's settlement, the forged hospital login records. "In return for this testimony," the agent said, his voice flat, "you will have full federal protection the moment this operation commences." We finalized the strategy. It was a three-pronged attack. 1, Olivia said, ticking a finger. The local police have warrants for Richard and Jenna for conspiracy, fraud, and elder abuse. 2, the federal warrants for the Northbridge offices will be executed simultaneously, targeting Richard's division. 3, she looked at me. "The second you are safe, Senior Gabriel's IT department will execute a hard lockdown of your credentials, freezing Richard out of the hospital system completely." But we needed the final piece of bait. Richard had been hounding me to sign the full power of attorney. Olivia drafted a new one. It looked identical to the one his lawyer had prepared, pages of dense, intimidating text. I sat at the kitchen table, Jenna watching me like a hawk, and I performed my role. I let my hand shake as I signed. Richard snatched the paper, his relief palpable. He never read the fine print in Section 4, Paragraph C, that Olivia had buried in 6-point font. "This authorization is granted solely for the temporary review of assets during an active investigation into financial fraud, and is immediately null and void upon any evidence of coercion or misrepresentation." While I was playing the victim, Daniel was tracking the predator. He had Richard under surveillance, following him to a desolate industrial park. He watched Richard meet a heavily tattooed man, Vinnie Rourke, the Vegas loan shark. Daniel's audio amplifier picked up the conversation. Richard's voice was high, desperate. "Just give me the weekend, I swear. After this weekend, I'll have the first payout, the trip to the mountains. The trip with Maggie will solve everything." The invitation came that night. Richard was all false concern. "Maggie, you look just awful," he said, touching my arm. "I've decided. We're all going up to the cabin near Clearwater Springs this weekend. Just us. You need to rest. Get away from the city noise." Jenna smiled, that sickeningly sweet smile. "And I'll be right there to take care of you. Mom, it will be so quiet and peaceful." An isolated cabin, a desperate man, an accidental death policy. The trap was obvious. I called Olivia from the burner. "They're moving on me," I said. She was silent, then exploded. "No, Maggie, absolutely not. It's a setup. We're arresting them tonight." "No," I said, my voice cutting through her panic. If you take them here, they'll lawyer up. They'll say I'm confused. They'll blame each other. I need them isolated. I want them in that cabin, where they feel safe, where they will say exactly what they plan to do. I want it on tape, right before you take them." She argued, but I was immovable. The police reluctantly agreed. It was now a high-risk operation. They fitted a GPS tracker to Richard's SUV and a second one to my own car, which Richard had insisted I drive, in case we need to separate. A covert tactical team would be staged on the mountain, disguised as hikers and forest service workers. I was given the code. If I was in immediate danger, I was to call 911 or Olivia and say one sentence, "The roads are too slippery." That night, I went to pack my overnight bag. Richard had helpfully suggested I put my luggage in my own car's trunk to save space. A cold dread made me check the spare tire well. I lifted the carpet lining, and I found it. A neatly packed canvas bag. Inside was a thick coil of nylon rope, a small, 1-gallon red can of gasoline, and a large pharmacy baggie filled with dozens of loose sedatives, enough to cause respiratory failure in a woman my size. This wasn't just a contingency. This was a kill kit. My hands did not shake. I took out my cell phone. I photographed the bag, the contents, its position in the trunk. I sent the encrypted images to Olivia and Daniel. Then I placed every item back, exactly as I had found it, and closed the trunk. If an accident happened now, they would know exactly where to look. The next morning, we left for the mountains. Richard and Jenna led the way in their SUV. I followed behind in my own car, the kit hidden beneath my luggage, through the windshield. I could see Jenna turn on the radio, her head nodding to some soft country song. Richard gestured out the window, pointing at the changing autumn leaves. I watched them in my rearview mirror for a moment, then met my own gaze. My eyes were not frightened. They were clear, cold, and absolute. They thought they were leading the lamb to the slaughter. They had no idea I was the one who had set the snare. We were 10 miles up the mountain pass when the sky opened up. A cold, driving rain turned the asphalt slick, and the wind began to howl. Richard slowed, his brake lights flashing. He pulled over onto a narrow gravel shoulder, and I stopped my own car behind him. He ran back to my window, shielding his face, his expensive coat already plastered to his shoulders. "This is getting too dangerous," he shouted over the storm. "This road is treacherous when it's wet. I don't want you driving. Get your overnight bag. You're riding with us in the SUV. You will be safer in the back seat." It was the perfect excuse. He was separating me from my car, from the gasoline can and the rope he and Jenna had planted in the trunk. He was taking control of the narrative, moving me into the vehicle he controlled. I did as I was told, playing the part of the frail, obedient wife. I climbed into the back of their luxury SUV, the smell of damp leather and Jenna's heavy perfume filling the enclosed space. Richard took the wheel, and I watched his eyes in the rearview mirror. They were not concerned. They were focused. As we climbed higher, I felt the vehicle accelerate. He was driving too fast for the conditions, intentionally letting the tires drift on the hairpin turns. Beside him, Jenna was a statue of tension, but not from the weather. She kept pulling her phone from her pocket, glancing at the screen, and shoving it back. She was waiting for the signal, the text from Vinnie Rourke that he was in position at the rendezvous point. The SUV's tires hissed, hydroplaning for a second on a patch of standing water. This was my moment. I leaned forward, gripping the back of Richard's headrest, and let the manufactured panic into my voice. Richard, stop, please. You're going too fast. The roads are too slippery. Let's just turn around. We have to go back. It was the signal, the code phrase I had arranged with the police, the words that would tell the hidden surveillance team that the plan was in motion. Richard just laughed, a tight, patronizing sound. It's fine, Maggie. We are almost at the cabin. You just need to relax. He didn't know the signal had been received. He didn't know that 3 miles ahead, the trap was not just his, but mine. He sped toward the blind curve, the one that hid a small logging turnout, the one that overlooked the deepest ravine on the pass. This was where Vinny was waiting with his truck, ready to create the accidental collision that would send my car, the one I was supposed to be in, over the edge. But the plan was already ruined. Richard came around the corner too hot. Vinny, seeing the SUV, pulled his truck out, trying to time the staged collision. But the rain had made the road a sheet of ice. Richard slammed on the brakes. The heavy SUV did not stop. It locked, sliding sideways, a multi-ton piece of metal careening directly into Vinny's path. Vinny swerved, but it was too late. His truck's heavy steel bumper clipped the front driver's side of the SUV. The impact was violent, a horrific shriek of metal, far more powerful than the tap they had planned. The SUV spun backward, slamming its entire front end directly into the steel guardrail. The force crumpled the engine block, the driver's side, where Richard sat, and the passenger side, where Jenna was, took the full, devastating impact. The back seat, where Richard had insisted I sit for safety, was jolted, but the cabin remained largely intact. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of the rain on hot metal and the drip of fluids. I was dazed, my head spinning, but I was conscious. My training took over, a cold wave of adrenaline pushing past the shock. I checked myself, bruised, battered, but functional. I unbuckled. The front seat was a catastrophe. Richard was slumped over the deployed airbag, unmoving, blood covering his face. I reached over, my fingers finding his carotid. Weak, thready pulse. His chest was angled unnaturally against the crushed steering wheel. Jenna was pinned against the passenger door, conscious but screaming. Her left leg was bent at an angle that legs should not bend, and when I looked at her abdomen, it was already distending and rigid, severe internal bleeding. She was clawing at the dashboard, her eyes wide with terror. "Richard," she gurgled. "Richard, wake up. Help me." Not once, in her agony, not once did she call out for Luke. I heard the sound of tires spinning on gravel. Vinny. He had backed his truck up, staring at the absolute carnage. This was not a minor accident. This was a felony. He panicked. He threw his truck into gear and sped away, fleeing the scene. He never saw the small, covert traffic camera the police had installed on a tree an hour before, the one that captured his license plate perfectly. Within 2 minutes, an impossible response time, unless you were already waiting. The mountain pass was flooded with the red and blue lights of state police and ambulances. The GPS trackers had worked. A trooper I knew from St. Gabriel's shined his light into the wreckage, his eyes finding mine. "Maggie," he said, his voice a low, urgent command. "We've got the scene. We'll handle the evidence, Mr. Holloway and Ms. Holloway. You just do what you do best." He was handing them back to me. The ambulance ride back down the mountain was a surreal, echoing nightmare. I was sitting on the jump seat, trapped between the two gurneys. I was a victim, but I was a nurse. On my left, I held pressure on Jenna's abdomen, trying to slow the bleeding, my other hand monitoring the IV bag. On my right, Richard, who was now intubated, went into cardiac arrest. I climbed onto the gurney, straddling him, and started compressions. I pumped his chest, breathing for the man who had tried to kill me, the question hammering in my head with every compression. What was the greater revenge, to let my hands slow, to let the pressure slip, or to use all my skill, all my strength, to keep them both alive, to force them to wake up and face the cold, sterile reality of justice? The ambulance bay doors flew open. The white lights of the emergency room, my emergency room, blinded me. The team rushed out, pulling the gurneys from my care. I stepped out onto the concrete, covered in their blood and the mountain rain, and stood as the sirens faded. It was exactly as it had begun. I was no longer the bait. I was the coordinator. And I knew, as they wheeled those two gurneys into Trauma 1 and Trauma 2, that my plan had reached its true, unstoppable end. The ER became a blur of controlled violence. Richard was fast-tracked to Operating Room 1. The trauma scan showed exactly what I had suspected in the ambulance: a ruptured spleen, 3 fractured ribs, and the sharp end of one of those ribs had punctured his left lung. He was bleeding into his own chest. Simultaneously, Jenna was rushed to Operating Room 2, her rigid abdomen signaling a massive internal hemorrhage. They were both on the knife edge of death. Dr. Reyes, his face streaked with sweat and their blood, grabbed my arm. "Maggie, they're your family. Do you want to scrub in, or do you want to be outside?" "Outside," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "It is a clear conflict of interest for me to provide direct care." He nodded, relieved. But I did not go to the waiting room. I went to the coordinator's desk. I was still the charge nurse. I would not touch them, but I would control every element of their care. I assigned the surgical teams. I monitored the blood bank supplies being sent to both rooms. I ensured every nurse charted every vital sign, every medication administered, every single milliliter of fluid with meticulous, unassailable accuracy. As the in-surgery lights glowed red, the main ER doors hissed open again. This time, it was not paramedics. It was the federal investigator, 2 local detectives, and Olivia, who looked pale but resolute. They had the warrants. I saw the names clearly: Richard Holloway, Jenna Holloway, Dr. Bryant, Vinnie Rourke, the entire chain. "We can't serve them while they're in surgery," the lead detective muttered, looking at me. "But we'll wait. We'll secure the rooms." They were turning my hospital into a holding cell. Jenna's surgery was faster. She was wheeled to the ICU, intubated and still unconscious. I waited. I waited for the anesthesia to wear off, for the pain of the abdominal incision to cut through the fog. When I saw her vitals spike, I knew she was surfacing. I entered the room alone, my scrubs still on, my clipboard in hand. A uniformed officer stood just outside the glass door. Jenna's eyes fluttered open, wide and wild with pain. When they focused on me, they filled with tears. "Maggie," she rasped, her hand, the one without the pulse oximeter, reaching for me. "Maggie, I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. It was Richard. It was all his idea. He was so convincing." She was babbling, the words tumbling out in a torrent of fear and self-preservation. She didn't know the room's high-definition camera was active. She didn't know a sensitive microphone was recording every whisper. "The pills," she sobbed. "He said they were just to calm you, to help you rest. And the nursing home. He said it was the best. The accident. The trip to the mountain. He just wanted it to look natural so the insurance would pay. He said we had to." She was trying to cast herself as his victim, but every word she spoke was a full confession of her role as a willing accomplice. I did not take her hand. I did not comfort her. I looked down at her, my face the impassive mask of a nurse assessing a patient. I checked her IV drip, noted the numbers on her monitor, and then met her terrified gaze. My voice was clinical, quiet. "When you were giving me those pills every night, Jenna, did you ever, even once, think about Luke?" The question struck her silent. Her face crumpled, the faux apology vanishing, replaced by an ugly, raw truth. "Luke was gone," she wailed, the sound cracking. "He was dead, I was. I was just trying to live." The officer outside the door heard the raised voice. He stepped in. He had heard everything. He looked at the doctor who had just arrived to check on her, and the doctor gave a curt nod. She was stable. The officer turned back to the bed. "Jenna Holloway," he said, his voice loud in the quiet room. "You are under arrest for conspiracy and attempted murder." He pulled a set of handcuffs from his belt. He cuffed her left wrist to the metal bed rail, the steel clicking shut just inches above the fresh IV line. Richard's surgery went on for 6 hours. He was far worse. He arrested twice on the table. I stood in the corridor, watching through the small, square window of the OR door. I saw the chaos, the surgeon calling for more blood, the frantic energy. A cold, dark thought surfaced, clear and simple. I was running the board. I controlled the flow of blood from the lab. I controlled the specialist nursing assignments. One delayed order for O-negative blood. One less experienced nurse sent in to help. It would be a tragic post-operative complication. It would be so easy. I let myself feel the temptation for one full, satisfying second. Then I turned, walked to the house phone, and picked it up. "This is Charge Nurse Holloway. I need 4 more units of packed red blood cells in OR1, stat. And I want Nurse Prentice to scrub in. Now. Get her out of Trauma 3. I chose to save him. I realized in that moment that letting him die was an escape. The ultimate revenge was not his death. It was his life. He had to be awake, aware, and fully cognizant for what came next. When they finally wheeled him out, a pale, broken, intubated man, he was not alone. His police escort, 2 officers, were waiting at the entrance to the recovery bay. As the gurney rolled to a stop and the anesthesiologist confirmed he was stable, one of the officers stepped forward, looked at the unconscious man, and began to read. "Richard Holloway, you are under arrest." I watched them read his rights to his sedated body, and I felt the heavy burden of my rage finally, irrevocably, transfer from my hands to the cold, impersonal grip of the law. It took several weeks for Richard to be stable enough. The interrogation did not happen in a police station, but in a sterile, windowless conference room in the hospital's administrative wing. Richard sat in a wheelchair, his arm in a sling, a pale blue patient gown visible beneath a robe. Opposite him sat Olivia, the federal investigator, and me. A video camera was pointed at him. For the first time in months, I was not dizzy, I was not confused, and I was not pretending. He tried to maintain the facade, his voice weak and raspy. Maggie, this is all a medical misunderstanding. Jenna, she just got overeager. She was trying to help. He tried to paint himself as a loving husband burdened by a sick wife, but Olivia was systematic. She laid the evidence on the table, one piece at a time. Here are the emails between you and Ms. Holloway, dated 3 months before Luke's death. A click. Here is the audio recording from Dr. Bryant's office, where he admits to adjusting the report. A click. Here is the $2 million insurance policy you took out. A click. And here are the photographs of the contents of your wife's car trunk, taken the morning of the accident. She placed the photos of the rope, the gasoline can, and the bag of sedatives on the table. Richard's face went white. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I simply looked at the man I had been married to for 30 years and asked questions, as if I were taking a medical history. Richard, on what date did you purchase that insurance policy? Which bank branch did you use to sign for Luke's settlement money? Did you ever, in the past 2 years, consider telling me the truth about that money? He stared at the table, unable to answer, because every answer was a confession. He finally broke. But it was not with remorse. It was with rage, pinned by the evidence. He slammed his good hand on the arm of his wheelchair. I lost a son too, he shouted, his face purple. I was in pain. I was just trying to protect what was left. The federal agent looked at Olivia. I looked at Richard. In that one sentence, he revealed everything. He had never seen me as his partner in grief. I was just another asset, just one more thing that was left. That outburst, combined with the mountain of evidence, was all they needed. His partial confession sealed the case. The charges were overwhelming financial fraud, aggravated elder abuse, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder in the second degree. Jenna, facing the same charges and the recording of her ICU confession, folded immediately. She accepted a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Richard, Dr. Bryant, and Northbridge in exchange for a reduced sentence. The trial was swift. When I took the stand, I was not the confused victim they had tried to create. I was Margaret Holloway, 57 years old, charge nurse of the St. Gabriel's ER. I spoke calmly and clearly. I detailed the medication, the dizziness, the gaslighting. And then I detailed how I used my phone's recorder, how I partnered with internal legal, how I faked my own signature on a document they were too arrogant to read, and how I set the trap on the mountain. The jury saw it all. They heard Jenna's terrified words in the ICU. They saw the security footage of Dr. Bryant admitting he'd adjusted the report. They saw the traffic cam footage of Vinnie Rourke's truck fleeing the scene of the crash. The picture was complete. A cold, meticulous plot that had been in motion for over 2 years. A plot that only failed because its target knew the difference between a real accident and a staged one. The verdicts were absolute. Richard received a long sentence, stripped of all financial licenses and his assets seized to repay what he had stolen. Jenna received a lighter sentence, but she would still spend many years in prison. Dr. Bryant lost his medical license and was convicted, as was Vinnie. And Northbridge, facing a massive federal inquiry, was fined heavily, their reputation in ruins. After the sentencing, as they wheeled Richard out of the courtroom in his wheelchair, now wearing prison orange beneath his jacket, he asked to speak to me. I agreed. But I kept my distance, just outside the reach of the corrections officer. His eyes were hollow. "Maggie," he whispered, "can you ever forgive me?" I looked at him, at the shell of the man who had been my husband. I didn't say yes or no. I just said, "You are alive, Richard. You have the rest of your life in prison to think about what you did to our son. That is the only thing I am leaving you." I walked out of the courthouse alone, stepping into the bright, cold afternoon sun of Clearwater Springs. My life was still fractured. I was still a mother without her son, a wife without a husband. But the fog was gone. I had reclaimed the one thing they tried to steal my future, my mind, and my own name. I drove back to St. Gabriel's. I walked into the locker room, took off my coat, and pulled on my white scrubs. I pinned my name badge to my chest and pushed open the double doors to the emergency room. It was my sanctuary, the place where the chaos had started, and the place where my revenge was finalized. Tonight, if the ambulance sirens wailed again, I would run toward them. But this time, I was no longer running from my own home. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you all are listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Make sure you subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, give this video a like, and hit that hype button so more people can hear this story.